Yes, we are thrilled that Imam Suleiman could join us today.
It's good to be with you all.
Have you been traveling much?
Yeah, too much, but I'm grounded for the next month, so I'm good.
We caught you at a good time.
Yeah. January's a little bit more relaxed.
Great. I hope everybody had a good celebration of the new year, and hope that 2022 will bring health and safety to everyone. And we'll get started here, and I'll just introduce myself to those of you who don't know me. I'm Rabbi Nancy Kasten. I'm the Chief Relationship Officer for Faith Commons, an organization started a few years ago by Pastor George Mason, who's here with us, to bring faith voices into the public square for the common good. We're also joined by Cameron Vickery, who is our Chief of Communications and Public Relations and partner in all our work, and Imam Omar Suleiman, who also partners with us quite a bit with Faith Commons, for which we are extremely grateful. And so we're together in preparation. It's coming up quickly. In less than a month, Valerie Kaur will be with us here in Dallas. And right now that is still on track to be an in-person visit by her. She'll be giving a public lecture on Wednesday night, February 2nd, and doing a workshop at Paul Quinn College on Thursday, February 3rd. Valerie Kaur is a Sikh American civil rights lawyer, activist, documentary filmmaker, and the inspiration and the driver behind something called the Revolutionary Love Project. And what the Revolutionary Love Project, for those of you who have been on these calls the past few weeks, you already know that it is really about gaining tools and practices that enable us to love others, to love our people who we may see as our opponents, and ultimately also to love ourselves. And of course, those three categories are a Venn diagram. They intersect in all kinds of ways. And that is the whole point behind revolutionary love, that it takes work to love. It takes work to love ourselves. It takes work to love others. It takes work to love, especially it takes work to love people who are in opposition or we perceive to be in opposition to us. So, and right now we're in the section of her compass, her practices that are focused on opponents. And she defines opponents as any person whose beliefs, words, or action causes violence, injustice, or harm. And she differentiates between opponents and enemies, maybe somewhat artificially, I'm not sure, but opponents being temporary, transitory, and enemies being fixed and unchanging. And I do think it's useful to think about opposition as the kinds of opposition that is unchanging versus the kind of opposition that occurs normally within all of us. You know, we oppose ourselves sometimes. We can cause violence to ourselves. We can be unjust to ourselves. We can harm ourselves, as well as people that we adore and love, our children, our parents, our best friends. So the idea of opponent really does open up these practices to much broader use and utility, really, when we're trying to develop a sense of revolutionary love. So the practice we're going to focus on today is the practice of listening. And, in some ways, I see this practice as being integrally related with the first practice that we talked about at the very beginning, which is wonder or curiosity. In both cases, it can sometimes be threatening or dangerous to be curious about someone or to wonder about someone. And so, Imam Suleiman, I'm just going to open it up to you to maybe give your thoughts about why listening can actually be threatening or dangerous.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you everyone for being here and for having me with you today. I think that the entire discussion of listening is, I think that oftentimes, if you don't feel like you have to listen, then you don't listen. And so not needing to listen is actually a privilege in and of itself, because you have nothing to lose by ignoring. And so that's why, when I think of an Islamic framework to this, at least, the Quran places great emphasis on listening and showing that grace when you really are a person who has an upper hand in this particular regard. And so whether that means that you are politically comfortable or that you are socially comfortable, you really don't have anything to lose by ignoring, except for your own enrichment, your own individual enrichment. So I think that if you're in that position, listening to someone who you really don't have to, because the quality of your life is not going to, in any obvious way improve, is a privilege that a lot of people sort of bank on. And so, I can live with a very simplistic worldview and reduce the unknown around me to simply being, foreign, and I'll engage with it when I have to. On the other hand, sometimes listening can be seen as affirming someone's looking down upon you. So if you're on the opposing side of that, at times, by listening, am I suggesting that your viewpoint, which can be so egregious to me, has value, that that your opinion, which might have embedded within it a superiority, right, a form of supremacy, is now legitimized by me listening to you. And that supremacy could be racial, or it could be ideological. I mean, it could be West versus East. It could be, Republican, Democrat. It could be so many different things. But am I, by lending you an ear, am I also affirming that this is a normal opinion to have and a discussion to have? So, I think that that's probably the threat at times. From my perspective, I can say that it's very hard to listen to someone who might be implying that I am less than them, and I have to prove first that I'm on equal ground with them in order for us to have an equal conversation, right? So it's like, all right, so first I have to peel back your layers of ignorance, which I'm not responsible for you having those layers of ignorance, but your layers of ignorance are about me. And so first I've got to sit there and get through all of that to convince you that I'm a decent enough human being to warrant a conversation between you and I. So sometimes that's very painful and very hard to do, because I don't feel responsible for your ignorance about me. But you know what? Hey, that's where grace comes in. That's where the bigger heart comes in. That's where, adhering to a more benevolent way of thinking and living, comes through. And so you have to renew your intention in Islam before you do anything. And so I think renewal of intention sometimes allows for you to do better at listening and acting as well.
Well, and that is the challenge that Valerie takes on. And I think that's what's so brave about what she does. She actually gives an example in her book, in the chapter on listening, of being in a restaurant and overhearing derogatory remarks about Muslims. and taking on the people who had made those comments and challenging them and humanizing herself to them in a way that was it was brave. But if she hadn't done so, by not doing that, right, we allow for those prejudices, those barriers, those the dehumanization that people can attribute to other human beings. We allow that to happen. And so the idea that revolutionary love that only revolutionary love can overcome that. And revolutionary love means that you actually have to be brave. Like, you have to be brave. You have to be, I mean, this is a little tiny person, facing off these big burly, people in a bar, and she's having this conversation with them. And, you have to do a lot of internal work to be able to be up to that challenge, right?
So I'd say particularly, by the way, that like as a Muslim, I have a deep appreciation for the Sikh community, because they were maliciously targeted after 9/11 by, and it shows you how simple bigotry is, right? People just think they're Muslim because they wear turbans and have beards, and so Sikhs were targeted heavily after 9/11, and they could have, as a community, taken a stance and said, we're not the ones you want, it's those other people, you should go after the Muslims, leave us alone. But instead, whether it was through private communication or in public, you always heard the Sikh community say, even if we were Muslim, so what? This is awful. Like, we don't want to be treated this way, nor do we want our Muslim neighbors to be treated this way. And I think, not to derail the discussion, but how nowadays you can see something awful and just scroll past it, right? So I think if you have more of those social experiments where something terrible is happening to someone that's not you, right? So you're witnessing, an awful episode of racism, instead of just scrolling past it, you can just keep moving, right? Just stay at the register. Hey, I'm here to pick up my sandwich. It's the same way as I'm here to watch this, not watch this right now. So I'm just going to scroll past this. And so that is that comes from a place of privilege, right? And I think that when you have been, when you've been through something, so empathy provokes a deeper form of listening, right? Empathy as a whole amplifies our faculties and our senses. And so empathy also amplifies our ability to listen, I think. So perhaps that's why you find that.
Exactly. And I think that all this work, and the reason that we need that these are called practices and tools, is that so much of our culture is now dominated by what you're talking about. We get flooded by these images, we get overwhelmed by them. I think about, for example, tomorrow, January 6th, when that happened last year, I really couldn't listen to everything that was being said about it. And now, hearing the recaps about it and reading the articles that a year later, I couldn't even absorb that at the time. And it's not because I didn't care about it or because I felt privileged. It was really because it was threatening and I was afraid of it. And so I think that, I think you could say privilege. I also think you could also say that sometimes people can't listen because it is too scary.
Yeah, shut off. Yeah, it's kind of numb. Yeah, so there's numbness and there is arrogance, and those two are not the same thing, even if the reaction, might seem as the same, right, to the other person, but the driver is different, I think, for sure. And so I think the same is true for just bad news in general, right? So there's just too much going on in the world, analysis paralysis. I'm sick of analyzing. I'm sick of seeing. I'm going to watch my SNL video instead, because that's going to give me some laughter right now. And I don't really feel like hearing about this or seeing this. it's not a lack of empathy. Sometimes it's actually that you have absorbed too many hits, right? Or you feel that way, even if you emotionally expose yourself to that, or were vested in that. You can just sort of shut off on the inside and deal with it later, delay your processing of it.
Or also just keep defaulting to the same echo chamber that you listen to all the time. So one example that I have thought about this week, because I came across an article that wasn't a new article, but lots of people I know are curious and frustrated by people who aren't getting vaccinated and don't understand the reluctance to get vaccinated. And I was not hearing voices of people who are not getting vaccinated. In a way, they don't really necessarily use this language, but it's rebellion. It's rebellion against a system that has dehumanized them in every other way by not allowing them to get health care or decent education or to live in safe and healthy environments. They're people who are, they have no public transportation, no resources. And now all of a sudden people are saying to them, we want you to get vaccinated so that I can be safe, right? So that I want you to get vaccinated. So, and these people are saying, well, you've never cared about my safety.
Right.
Why should I care about yours? I wasn't hearing that message until like the last few days. And I think we all, we get frustrated by other people's lack of listening, but the only thing we can really change is our own ability to listen.
Right. Yeah. And so it when you simplify the opposition and you take a reductionist approach to everything you disagree with, then it makes it easier for you to act in a black and white way, right? Because you've made your viewpoint so narrow of everything that doesn't immediately resonate with you, that your actions can be narrow as well, right? And so you're going to act out in very, very simplistic ways. And so I think that's the problem as well, because the echo chambers have grown larger, right? To where it's just, you could, and the algorithms will feed you exactly what you need, they'll keep on feeding it over and over and over again. And so I can tell you that sometimes it's just really hard to even, like, I don't feel like putting forth the energy to be heard sometimes. I'm just like, you know what? I didn't choose for you to be in your echo chamber, but now that you're there, I really don't want to waste my time trying to get you out of your echo chamber. You just stay there. I'm going to ignore you because of how you've decided to act.
Yeah. So I think this is, again, this is something that she addresses. She says, to listen to our opponents is to seek to understand them, not to change them or persuade them, not to compromise with them or legitimize them. Listening to our opponents preserves their humanity and our own. And I think that's the kind of twist that she makes, because she challenges us when we do things that dehumanize other people to think about that and to say, and again, nobody can do this all the time, but I think the awareness of it is just so important.
Absolutely.
So we have some questions. Josh, do you want to just jump in here? And then Lindsay?
Yeah, my thinking was that, listening, listening is also, like my comment said, listening is not a simple action. I think that there are many, it involves many different kinds of actions. Went through some of the simple things you hear in common arguments. You say that you hear me, but are you listening to what I'm saying? Or if you're listening to what I'm saying, but I don't feel heard. And, some people listen, some people I think actively listen as a defense mechanism. And so we really don't even know how they're listening to us, or what is going on in their heads that ultimately triggers things in our heads about listening to ourselves. And so, we don't get caught in vicious circles, although we can. But I think that even in an age where we have tried to encourage each other, and we have tried to train ourselves, practice active listening, trying to really listen to a person, what does that mean? And I don't mean it in a snarky way. What does that mean to really listen? Because what should we be listening? It implies, should we be listening for something? Who decides what we should be listening for? And I think Jewish tradition is built on the idea of listening. We're supposed to listen. We're supposed to listen for and to the commanding voice, and that's part of our it's part of our narrative. And so again, how do we listen for that?
Well, and so actually last week's Torah portion talks about it, right? Because Moses says to God, why should I go and talk to Pharaoh? Pharaoh will never listen to me. The Israelites didn't listen to me. And the explanation that's given in the book of Exodus is the Israelites couldn't listen because of kotzer ruach, which literally means shortness of breath, like feeling so threatened that they could not breathe. Sometimes it's translated differently,
exhaustion, like because of total exhaustion is one of those translated.
Bitterness of spirit or something like that, right? So both for our own selves when we're not listening and when we sense that someone else isn't listening, and it doesn't really matter what we're listening for or to, but just noticing when there's the constriction, right? And trying to be that open place.
It's going to be my like every time I hear the stories as they're told from different traditions. There's a great Islamic scholar that was once addressed very rudely, and he said to him, he responded to the person that was addressing him in that manner, and he said, "Am I worse than Pharaoh?" And he said, "No." And he said, "Are you better than Moses?" He said, "No." He said, "But God says in the Quran, speak to them with words of kindness so that perhaps they will listen and be reminded." That's the command of God in the Quran to Moses and Aaron, is to go speak to the Pharaoh with words of kindness in a lenient way. Layyin literally means leniency, so that they can be reminded and be awoken. So it's interesting because it's like we use that example in our community to say that, when you're talking to someone, remember when you're giving advice, they're not worse than Pharaoh and you're not better than Moses, peace be upon him. So keep that in mind as you're speaking.
Kimberly, you had put something in the chat earlier. I'm sorry I missed you. And then Lindsay.
It's okay, Nancy. No, I was just saying, as I was listening, I don't have, as a Black woman, I don't have the luxury of not listening. I don't have that is a luxury. So if you talk about privilege, I wake up Black every morning. I've been doing it for 63 years now. And people can see me and make decisions that impact my life and the life of those I love, and discount most frequently, sometimes elevate whatever speech I'm getting ready to share. But, when you think about things like, oh, am I privileged? I actually am a middle-class Black woman, so I'm more privileged than some. But, the privilege of saying, okay, I'm not going to listen now, or I'm going to scroll past, that's a luxury I don't experience. So I think it's important to just consider that there are people who we're not looking at in this group who experience you can't turn it off, you can't turn away because it's your life.
But let me ask you this. I'm going to push back just a minute because we know.
Of course you are. So. That's why I love you.
So I can sometimes feel not listened to by people of color. And I also imagine that you can too, right? So if we're going to call that thing, that prevents us from really listening, privilege, then we all have some of it, right? Or we all,
Boy, that's interesting. I don't know. But what I will say is, in a culture where white body supremacy has been normalized, if there is a state of multiple groups and individuals having privilege, it's not even close to being equitable or equal. And I think if people who identify as white are feeling not listened to by people of color, there's another layer to interrogate that might even be the mirror on privilege. But I don't know.
I
You know.
agree with you. I agree with
Yeah.
you. And again, I think that's why, Valerie's work is so really revolutionary, because at a certain level, if everybody's human, then everybody has equal agency, and everybody has equal liability and limitation. And so it's complicated, but listening does mean, if you really do listen, I think part of what it, and we've said this in different ways, what's so dangerous about it is that it does challenge the system in which you're functioning, and it challenges the assumptions that you've built your life on up until now. And so if you have to change those, that means a lot of other things have to change too, and that can be very, very threatening. Lindsay, you had something also that you put in the chat.
Well, actually, to address Kimberly, actually, I've been listening to an anti-racism leader, Tori Glass, and she addressed that. Actually, she said our nervous system doesn't know the difference between privilege and safety. So that's kind of like, I've been looking at what's going on in the body to try to address that better, because yeah, I don't know how you address that when there is a serious inequality happening and they're feeling like they're being oppressed too. So yeah, that's why I've been like trying to look at anxiety, what's going on in people's bodies, and seeing that as what needs to be addressed, because the words aren't really working.
Right, and that lack of safety is so pervasive now, and whether it's real or perceived now almost doesn't matter. So that's what, again, if we're going to change that, we're all going to have to think about how do we participate in creating safe spaces and put ourselves in situations where we can feel safer. I mean, for Valerie Kaur to speak up in a bar about being a Muslim and why these men's prejudices were so dangerous and threatening to her, that ultimately gave her more safety and security. But it took a lot of courage to be able to do it. George, do you want to say a few words, and then you put something in the chat, and then we're probably going to have to close for today.
Yeah, I have so many things that come to mind. Omar, I'm reminded of your prayer at Congress and remembering how if anyone were to have listened to that without prior agendas in their minds, what they would have heard is something that in, I think, almost any of our religious traditions, we could have offered verbatim and been praised by our own constituencies. And yet they were prepared, a group was prepared before you even prayed to hit the send button and to immediately denounce you. And it was a cynical response, but one that was also deeply dangerous to you and your community as a result of it. And the lack of listening with a prior commitment to appreciation was was dangerous. And I think we have to remember that listening is can either draw us closer, or the failure to can bring harm to us and to others as well. So just a reminder of that in your experience. And I don't know if you want to say any more about that.
I was just about to type in the box. Thank you for that. I appreciate you bringing that up. See, that's, you know, when something like that happens, it's like, you know, do you not see what's happening here? Like you almost want to scream at the top of your, like, how does anyone think this was some organic response to have 400 articles published within like 20 minutes, all being duplicated on these right-wing sites? So how does anyone think this is normal, right? And just, this was about conflicting views, but most people wanted to speak on the premise of what the hit pieces were saying, not question where the hit pieces came from and why they were orchestrated in the way that they were orchestrated, and what the agenda and intention was behind that. So for me, it was like, I don't even want to listen to your questioning me on the basis of these hit pieces, because I feel like it's so unjust that I have to answer when I'm on the receiving end of an orchestrated attack this way. And so that was definitely one of those experiences, but I appreciate you bringing that up, and I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you.
Well, and I think that is in some ways a parallel to Kimberlane's experience as a Black person, that, you know, it's been going on for a lot longer than social media has, you know, that people just have all of these preconceived prejudgments about and associations with anyone who looks like or says something or does something or believes something, and that's going to come back and prevent them from hearing what they're saying. And that's, again, if we're going to undo these systems of oppression and injustice, we're going to have to hone our skills, because right now, you know, our culture, our technology, our leaders are all capitulating to a very different way of operating.
Nancy, can I just close us with a reminder about the events coming up and the fact that sign up is underway. And I hope that some of you have been kind enough to become sponsors. And if you have not yet paid your sponsorship and sent us your logo, please do so as soon as possible. We're still receiving sponsorships. It's $1,000 for a sponsor, and that gets you pretty much unlimited tickets to the event, and then 2 tickets to the workshop as well. But sign up is underway, and everyone should sign up who intends to come. And please push this out to your networks also. We are still planning to be in person at this point. It will be live streamed and it will be recorded, but that's not what we're aiming for. We'd like to be present with one another, and that would be the most beneficial, I think.
Well, we're going to close for today. We'll be back next week. If anybody wants to stay on for a few more minutes, please stay. We can continue to have conversation, but thank you for being here. And thanks especially to Imam Suleiman for joining us today.
Always.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, George, Kimberlane, Lindsay, Joshua.